like to get a copy of this program, there are a few ways that we can help you. You may subscribe at LibertyRadioLive.com for only $45 a month, and you'll receive an MP3 CD weekly of all the First Amendment Rights Media Group programs. As a bonus, we'll send you a password for our audio archives online. That's a $15 value. Or you can request any month of any program on one MP3 CD for a minimum donation of only $20. Or any single program on tape, MP3 CD, or CD for only $15. You can do all this online at LibertyRadioLive.com. Just follow the instructions to make a donation or subscribe. Don't do Internet? Then call 559-781-3773, 559-781-3773, and we'll be honored to help you. Thank you from all of us here at the First Amendment Rights Media Group.
Good evening and welcome to the Investigative Journal. And like I mentioned earlier this week, periodically we suspend regular broadcasting and provide online educational courses. And basically, what is the hidden truth that's been kept from the American people and the people of the world? The course we're discussing this week is being taught to us by Jon Phelps, and it's called Understanding the Jesuits. This is part 3 of the course, and now I'll turn it over to Eric for the following 2 hours. Go ahead, Eric.
Pleasure to be with you and the listeners. We shall now embark upon, after we have read about the establishment of the Jesuit order, their influence in the doctrines of the papacy, and specifically the Council of Trent. The Council of Trent and its maxims must ever be on our mind if we are to understand that Rome never changes. Even according to the documents of Vatican II, every pope must swear that he will uphold the doctrines of the Council of Trent. Well, the Protestant Reformation was breaking the temporal power of the Pope throughout Northern Europe. Whole nations were breaking away: Germany, Holland, Denmark, England, and others. And therefore, it was the Jesuits who came to the forefront, the mighty warriors for the Pope that they are and were, for the purpose of bringing Europe and the world back to fealty to the Pope, to kiss his toe, to worship him as God manifests in the flesh, evidence that he is dressed in white and thus divine, according to the doctrines of Rome. So the Jesuits began to codify the most important maxims of the papacy that had ever been written from Thomas Aquinas to the present in 1545, when the Council of Trent began in Trent, Italy. Its purpose was to thwart and resist the doctrines of the Protestant Reformation, and thus to destroy it. This was the spine, the backbone of the Jesuit order's Counter-reformation. So what we have beginning now is this great dialectic, this key to our understanding history for the last 500 years, Reformation and the doctrines of the Bible versus the Counter-reformation and the evil designs of Rome as codified in the Council of Trent. We are looking now at Dowling's History of Romanism in a chapter titled Popery at Trent. Popery at Trent. On page 475, we read, Book 7, Popery at Trent, from the opening sessions of the Council of Trent, AD 1545, to the closing session, AD 1563. At the time of Luther's death, the Fathers of Trent had just commenced the celebrated council called at that city by Pope Paul III, partly with the professed design of promoting a reform of the abuses of the Church and of the morals and manners of the clergy, which was so loudly demanded, but chiefly for the purpose of rooting out the Lutheran heresy, and in opposition to the doctrines of the German reformers, of stating and defining with more exactitude and precision than ever before the doctrines of the Roman Church. The opening session of the Council of Trent was held on the 13th of December, 1545, and the closing session was not held until the month of December, 1563, after several suspensions and intermissions, about 18 years from its commencement. The Council of Trent is the last general council ever held by the Romish Church. As of 1845, we know Vatican I was 1870 and Vatican II was 1962 to 65. And consequently the very highest source of authority as to the present doctrines and character of Romanism. In the present chapter we shall give a synopsis of the most remarkable doctrinal decrees of the different sessions of the celebrated council. The writer then begins to describe all 25 sessions of the Council of Trent, and we shall just merely touch on two of the most important ones. Page 478, The History of Romanism, John Dowling, 1845. It is contained in my old book CD with my Vatican Assassins 3 CD. The second session was held January 7th, 1546, was chiefly consumed in discussions as to the style to be adopted by the council and the order of the future proceedings, whether they should commence with doctrine or discipline. Several of the members of the council desired the insertion of the words representing the universal church, unquote. In the debate which ensued, the Bishop of Feltry observed that if the clause were admitted, the Protestants would take occasion to say that since the church is composed of two orders, the clergy and the laity, and of course the Bible has nothing to say of anything about any clergy or any laity, it could not be fully represented if the latter were excluded. To this the Bishop of St. Mark replied that the laity could not be termed the church, since according to the canons they had only to obey the commands laid upon them. That one reason why the council was called was to decide that laymen, again there's no such term in the Bible, ought to receive the faith which the church dictated without disputing or reasoning, and that consequently the clause should be inserted to convince them that they were not the church and had nothing to do but to hear and submit. Do you hear that, Roman Catholics? The Council of Trent says you are not the Roman Catholic Church. You are not part of the ruling body of the papacy. Your duty is merely to hear and submit, like the animals, quote unquote, they consider you to be. The third session was celebrated on February 4th, 1546, and nothing was done except to adopt a decree of the council and to repeat the Nicene Creed. In the fourth session was celebrated on the 8th of April, 1546, and was one of the most important sessions of the council. In this session, a decree was passed which placed tradition upon an equality with the Scriptures, declared the books of the Apocrypha, which are nothing more than Jewish fairy tales, to be a part of the Word of God, elevated the Latin translation of the Scriptures, called the Vulgate, to an authority superior to that of the inspired Hebrew and Greek originals, and enacted severe penal laws against the liberty of the press. We must repeat this. What the council did was it placed tradition on an equality with the Scriptures. This is a sign of any cult. The Mormons place the Pearl of Great Price and Doctrine of Covenants and the Book of Mormon, all of them on an equal footing with the Bible. This is why Mormonism is a cult. And of course I can prove that it was started by Jesuits through high-level Freemasons like Joseph Smith and Brigham Young. Further, the council declared the books of the Apocrypha to be part of the Word of God. The Apocrypha, if you've ever read them, are nothing more than Jewish fairy tales or Jewish fables that the Apostle Paul warns the writer in Timothy not to read or be carried away with. Because in these fairy tales, some of the doctrines of Rome are substantiated, such as auricular confession. What else did the council do? It elevated the Latin translation of the Scriptures called the Vulgate. This is Jerome's Latin Vulgate. This is sheer heresy. And as Bible believers, we utterly reject it as corrupt, having nothing to do with the true Scriptures. The council goes on and says, to an authority superior to that of the inspired Hebrew and Greek originals. What it tells you there is that the Jesuits completely throw out the Hebrew text, the Masoretic text, and the Greek originals, the Greek Textus Receptus, or also called the Byzantine text, which was the Greek text of the Orthodox Church for many centuries until about the 20th century. I'll never forget the day I went into a Greek Orthodox church. I knew this one girl that she lived in Washington, and she decided to take me to the Orthodox Church, and she brought me into the pastor's study there, and I said, you mind if I take a look at your Greek text? He said, sure, go ahead. I looked at it, and it was Nessel's text. Eberhard Nessel's text, which is nothing more than a modernized Westcott and Hort Greek text, which is nothing more than Jerome's Latin Vulgate put in a Greek text to overthrow the Textus Receptus, the foundation for the Reformation Bible, the Geneva and the AV 1611. So the Jesuits, whenever they are influential, will always reject the Hebrew and Greek originals and make you abide by Jerome's Latin Vulgate. And it's most intriguing that many, many of the new versions of the English Bibles are pro-Jerome's Latin Vulgate in their readings, pursuant to the Council of Trent. That is the NIV, the NASB, the RSV, etc., 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 all based on a corrupt Greek text, Westcott and Hort's Greek text that was given to them by the Jesuits and snuck into the revision committee when they were busy overthrowing the British Empire. And then Trent says that the Jesuits enacted severe penal laws against the liberty of the press. Do we enjoy the liberty of the press? Do we enjoy the right to be able to speak as we are speaking even now? Of course we do. We realize this doesn't exist in about 80% of the rest of the world, and it only exists there in part in this country, in this very dark time. But the liberty of the press was a maxim championed by the Reformers and by the Baptists. And the liberty of the press is condemned by the Council of Trent. People say to me, oh, the Pope's a nice man. My father said to me, there's a lot of people that like him. My father's wife is a Roman Catholic, very nice lady. I said, Dad, it has nothing to do with the personality of the priest. It has everything to do with the doctrine that he stands for. John Paul II can apologize all day long for the Crusades and for the Inquisition and for the Third Reich, but until the Council of Trent is trashed, it means nothing. We need to hate these doctrines. Anybody that says we do not have the freedom of the press, we need to hate what they have said. And this is what Trent does. Tradition was declared of an equal authority with the Scripture. This is evidence of any cult. We continue. Again, we repeat, the Apocrypha teaches, as do the Papists, that a man can justify himself and make atonement for his sins by his own works. The inspired Word of God ascribes justification and atonement wholly to the merit of Christ's righteousness and the efficacy of his sufferings. So here we have the great divide. Cainite religion, as founded by Cain, when he offered the fruit of the garden that he had planted to the Lord. These were symbolic of his good works, of his works that he did in his own flesh, and that he would use these works, these supposedly good works, as a reason to justify himself before God, and God would accept his sacrifice. And the Lord rejected Cain and his sacrifice. The Lord told Cain to go get a lamb and cut its throat and bleed it, and the blood of the lamb will be acting as an atonement and reckon for your sins. But Cain would refuse to shed the blood of the lamb in foreshadowing the coming of the Son of God, for he is the Lamb of God that taketh away the sin of the world. And what does he do? He gets angry and says, okay, Lord, if you want some blood shed, I'll shed some blood. And he kills his brother Abel. Here we have the two camps that exist in the world today. Those that follow the religion of Cain and their supposed good works, and those few that follow the Lord Jesus Christ and trusting in the blood of the Lamb, having been washed in his precious blood, and have no righteousness in and of ourselves except what has been imputed to us by the grace of God, as we are declared to be justified, having believed the gospel by his grace. And those who justify themselves by their good works are always the persecutors of those of us who have fled to Christ as our refuge and accepting him as the Lamb of God. We don't persecute the Cainites. The Cainites persecute us. That's always the way it is. So the Apocrypha is Romish. It goes back to Jewish fairy tales. It ultimately rests in Babylonian mythological religion that hates God and hates his word. And Trent embodies this. And Trent is today, was when Cardinal Ratzinger was made Pope Benedict XVI, he swore to uphold this iniquitous, this wicked Council of Trent, whose overseer was Diego Lainez, who was a Jesuit and a Jew by race, one of the last Jews by race to ever be allowed into the Jesuits until 1946. And it was this Lainez who oversaw the Council of Trent. In Chapter 2, with the fourth session continued, the Latin Vulgate exalted above the inspired Hebrew and Greek scriptures, private judgment and liberty of the press forbidden, and a popish censorship of the press established. This is what happened as a result of Trent. You no longer have freedom of speech. You do not have freedom of press. And this is why the Jesuits hate the First Amendment. They want that First Amendment flushed. And you know what? It already is to a large part because of the legal schools, the law schools in this country. Remember, 1 out of every 10 lawyers is trained by Jesuits. The foremost law schools in this country are Jesuit institutions like the Georgetown University Law Center. And what do? They have had Supreme Court decisions, and they've enticed churches to get a 501c3 status, and thus uniting church and state. And as a result, there is in fact no more separation of church, an organized church religion, the papacy, and the government of the United States. It is no longer separated. And when possible, specifically through this 9/11 fiasco and the recent laws that have been passed, the Patriot Acts, there will be no more First Amendment, Second Amendment, Third, Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth. They're all going to be gone because those amendments limit the powers of the federal government, and the form of government that the Jesuits seek to establish everywhere is absolutist fascism, where there are no limits whatsoever on the powers of those people who call themselves the government. This is all embodied in the Council of Trent, that every priest must read and study before he is ever ordained to the Roman priesthood. We continue on. The right of private judgment in reading the Scriptures prohibited, and its exercise punished. we read here in one of the Maxims of Trent, says, quote, "In order to restrain petulant minds, the council further decrees that in matters of faith and morals, and whatever relates to the maintenance of Christian doctrine, no one confiding in his own judgment shall dare to wrest the sacred scriptures to his own sense of them." Get that. No one confiding in his own judgment shall dare to wrest the scripture, the sacred scriptures, the Vulgate, to his own sense of them. Contrary to that which hath been held, and still is held, by Holy Mother Church, whose right it is to judge of the true meaning and interpretation of sacred writ, the Vulgate, or contrary to the unanimous consent of the Fathers, even though such interpretation should never be published. If any disobey, let him be denounced by the ordinaries and punished according to law. And that punishment, most of the time, was death by fire. That's right. You did not have the right to own a Bible in your own language and sit around your hearth and rejoice in the wonderful doctrines of the Word of God. If you were discovered, you were arrested by the Inquisitor. They would take your Bible, they would burn it, and they would take you down 3 stories below the ground and torture a confession out of you after they burned your feet, flayed the skin off your flesh, plucked out your eyes, cut off your breasts if you were women. After they gave you the water torture of letting a slow drip and rag go down into your mouth and then ripping it out when it got down into your stomach, hanging you up with your arms behind you with a rock tied to your feet, and then bouncing you up and down until your arms were broken, until you couldn't move, tearing out your tongue so you couldn't speak, putting your eyes out with hot pincers, pouring molten lead into your ears. All these things were done for centuries by the Jesuits and their Inquisition, enforcing the Council of Trent, and they're dying to enforce it here. They can't wait. The liberty of the press, authoritatively also forbidden. So now, we don't have the right to private judgment, we don't have the right to read the Scriptures, we don't have the right to converse and talk about what the Scripture may or may not mean. I mean, what higher conversation can we have? And now we don't have the liberty of the press to publish what we've concluded, publish what we've come to. This is why my book, Vatican Assassins, will not be sold in Barnes & Noble. It will not be sold in any major bookstore. They refuse to sell it on the shelf. They may order it, but they will never carry it. Because it's these kinds of things that are exposed, and when people see what a horrible compendium of wicked doctrines is in the Council of Trent, they begin to think. We continue on. Page 491, The History of Romanism, Popery at Trent. These rules are the laws of the Romish Church in precisely the same sense as a statute enacted by the House of Representatives and Senate of the United States and signed by the President becomes the law of the American nation. And all popish bishops and priests are bound to enforce these laws wherever popery prevails to the very utmost of their ability. Let the Protestant lover of his Bible and of that glorious bulwark of liberty, the freedom of the press, pay particular attention to the passages marked by italics or capitals, and then say whether it is possible for freedom to exist in any land where popery is the predominant religion, and the priests of Rome possess the power to enforce these laws of their church. And that's what's coming to America. As the priest, as the Archbishop of New York rules this country, he is the prince of the church, the king of America, ruling from his castle, St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City. Don't you think for 1 minute that he does everything he can to control the press, through the Knights of Malta that he controls, working in Rockefeller Center right across the street from St. Patrick's Cathedral. It's Rockefeller Center from which publish all the major periodicals of this country, Time, Life. You got CIA there, British intelligence there, all making sure that you get lied to, all on orders of the Archbishop of New York, because he controls the press in this country through the Council on Foreign Relations, as he employs many of his Masonic Jewish labor Zionists who rule Israel for the benefit of the papacy. All of this is in accordance with the Council of Trent. Continuing on, Popery at Trent. We see some of the other doctrines that are of the Reformation that are condemned. Quote, whoever shall affirm that newborn infants, even those sprung from baptized parents, ought not to be baptized, let him be accursed. Now we start the sessions where the Jesuits are accursing all the Protestants. The Jesuits put in excess of 100 curses on the Protestants of the Reformation because of the doctrines of the Word of God that these Protestants and Baptists preached. So if you don't believe that infants should be baptized, and of course baptism is by immersion, it's not by sprinkling, you're under a curse. The Bible teaches no such thing as infant baptism. The Bible teaches that when you're saved and you receive Christ as your Savior, it's then and only then that you follow the Lord in baptism, not a minute before. But oh no, if you believe this, you're accursed. Whosoever shall deny that the guilt of original sin is remitted by the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, bestowed in baptism, if anyone thinks differently, let him be accursed. So therefore, those of us who do not believe that in such thing as baptismal regeneration, that you have to be baptized to be saved, if we don't believe that, and the Bible teaches no such thing, including the 16th chapter of Mark, we're under a curse. And if we're cursed, we can be killed. And to kill a heretic is no murder. Continuing on. Whosoever shall affirm that justification received is not preserved and even increased in the sight of God by good works, but that works are only the fruits and evidences of justification received and not the causes of its increase, let him be accursed. So therefore, if you don't believe in work salvation, if you believe in justification by grace through faith, and it's not of yourselves, it's the gift of God, Ephesians 2, 8, and 9, that there are no works you can do that are pleasing to God that will give you salvation and justification before God, you are accursed. Why? Because Romanism is Canaanite religion. It is the worship of the works of man's hands, and it's your works in the light of the priests, in the eyes of the Pope, that justify you before God, or the God of the papacy. And this God is not the God of the Bible. It's the devil. The devil's great religion is work salvation. You got to do this. You got to do that. You can't do this. You can't do that. You must do this. You must do that. The Bible teaches we're not under law, but we're under grace. For grace, for sin shall not have dominion over you, for you're not under law, but under grace. Once you are saved by the grace of God, yes, we do have good works, but those are only evidences of our salvation. To say good works save you is heresy. And if you say this in a Catholic country where the priests rule, they will put you to death. Continue on. Whosoever shall affirm that a righteous man sins in every good work, at least venially, or which is yet more intolerable mortally. And of course, there's no such thing as a venial or mortal sin in the Bible. That's all Romish trash. And that he therefore deserves eternal punishment.
Fight the fight. We are here to equip you because you love the truth. LibertyRadioLive.com. If you'd like to get a copy of this program, there are a few ways that we can help you. You may subscribe at LibertyRadioLive.com for only $45 a month, and you'll receive an MP3 CD weekly of all the First Amendment Rights Media Group programs. As a bonus, we'll send you a password for our audio archives online. That's a $15 value. Or you can request any month of any program on one MP3 CD for a minimum donation of only $20. Or any single program on tape, MP3 CD, or CD for only $15. You can do all this online at LibertyRadioLive.com. Just follow the instructions to make a donation or subscribe. Don't do Internet? Then call 559-781-3773, 559-781-3773, and we'll be honored to help you. Thank you from all of us here at the First Amendment Rights Media Group.
Now listen to me. The Bible says, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's. I want you to know that a corporation is Caesar.
Government takeover of the church. This DVD is the most powerful tool we have for waking up those asleep in the pews. The Scripture calls for His people to come out of her. The corporate church is the apostate church, the whore that rides the beast. Make copies and give them away to your corporate church friends and loved ones. The truth will make them free. They will watch the DVD, Government Takeover of the Church. Who will tell them if not you?
Get this DVD for a donation of $25 from LibertyRadioLive.com. Order online today or call 559-781-3773.
Now listen to me.
If you read the history books, the most often asked questions of Southerners was this: why did you fight? And the most often given answer is, because you're here. In other words, the South did not invade the North invaded the South.
Was it the Civil War or War of Federal Aggression? John Weaver sets the record straight in this DVD series on the Civil War from the Old Past Christian History Conference. Was there a war to set the slaves free? Or was it a war to enslave us all? Get this DVD and judge for yourself. War of Federal Aggression. The truth seems strange only because we've been indoctrinated with a fiction. War of Federal Aggression. Get it today.
Get this DVD for a donation of $25 from LibertyRadioLive.com. Order online today or call 559-781-3773, 559-781-3773.
Okay, we continue on with Popery at Trent. Popery at Trent, page 509 of Dowling's History of Romanism, 1845. How miserably debased must be the soul and intellect of a rational being before he can submit to a religion which enjoins such rules as the above. The votaries of Jupiter, Diana, and Juggernaut would be ashamed of them. Is it possible for the priest to believe these disgusting absurdities? And what is he talking about? Let's read what Trent has to say concerning, quote-unquote, the Eucharist. And remember, this Eucharist is this little Jesus cookie that the priest pronounces some magic hocus-pocus words in Latin, and all of a sudden, ipso facto, this little wafer that dissolves in your mouth, you don't even have to chew it, all of a sudden turns into the literal, physical flesh of the Jesus Christ of Romanism, and you eat it. And the question arises, what happens if this piece of flesh of the literal Jesus Christ falls on the floor? What should you do? Chinook puts the question, What would happen if a mouse grabbed it and ran in a hole? God forbid, what would happen if one of these Eucharists was flushed down the toilet into the sewer? Well, here's what Trent has to say about such a thing with regard to, quote-unquote, the Eucharist. If the priest vomit the Eucharist and the species appear entire, he must piously swallow it again. But if a nausea prevent him, then let the consecrated species be cautiously separated and put by in some holy place till they be corrupted, and after let them be cast into holy ground. But if the species, the Eucharist, the little Jesus cookie, do not appear, the vomit must be burned and the ashes thrown into holy ground. Can you believe this? This is absolutely insanity. And this was one of the doctrines of Trent. This is the absurdities you come to when you believe that this little cookie, this little wafer, all of a sudden, by magical powers of the priest, becomes the literal body of Jesus Christ. And this is the doctrine of Trent that every priest swears to uphold and that every pope swears to uphold. No matter how learned or scientific they may appear on their face, they believe these absurdities and superstitions. We go on. Whosoever shall affirm that baptism is indifferent, that is, not necessary to salvation, let him be accursed. We touched on that. So we have this Council of Trent, whereby the Jesuits condemn doctrine after doctrine after doctrine of the Protestant Reformation, and this serves to be the foundation of the order's Counter-reformation. Now we will continue on. Let's be delivered of this heresy and this vexation of soul, from auricular confession to everything else that the papacy does to create works to justify before God, quote unquote. And let's go to one of the perversions, an even greater perversion, called the Garden of the Soul, printed in 1844. Dowling writes in page 516, "The disgusting indecency of auricular confession and its necessarily corrupting influence both to priest and penitent must be evident to all when the nature of the subjects is considered upon which the priests are bound to examine their female penitents relative to violations of the laws of chastity." And again, the Jesuits are masters of these questions. I have now lying before me the edition of The Garden of the Soul, printed in 1844 at New York, and as we are informed on the title page, quote, "with the approbation of the Right Reverend Dr. Hughes, Bishop of New York." This is Dagger John Hughes. On pages 213 and 214 of that popular Roman Catholic book of devotion, I find the following questions in English for the examination of conscience on the 6th commandment, namely really the 7th commandment, thou shalt not commit adultery. They are transcribed verbatim et literam, with the omission of portions of 2 of the queries, which are calculated to suggest modes of pollution and crime that a pure-minded person would never think of. I had thought at first of translating these questions into Latin and throwing them into a note, but they are printed in plain English in a popular book of devotion issued under the auspices of the most celebrated Romish bishop in America, and to be found in the hands of almost every Roman Catholic. And it is nothing but right that Protestants, and especially those who send their daughters to Roman Catholic seminaries, should know the kind of queries that will be proposed by the priest in the secret confessional to their wives and their daughters in case they should be induced to embrace the religion of Rome. I must be excused for omitting recent portions of the 2 vilest questions in the filthy list. I dare not pollute my page with them. The work in which they are found can be procured by any Roman Catholic storybook. The following are the questions. Now get a load of this. Quote, would you like to have your wife have these questions put to her? Or worse yet, your daughter, your little daughter, who's probably not even come to puberty? Quote, have you been guilty of fornication or adultery or incest or any sin against nature? Any sin against nature, either with a person of the same sex or with any other creature? How often? Or have you designed or attempted any such sin, or sought to induce others to it? How often? Have you been guilty of self-pollution, namely masturbation, or of immodest touches of yourself? How often? Have you touched others or permitted yourself to be touched by others immodestly, or given or taken wanton kisses or embraces or any such liberties? How often? Have you looked at immodest objects with pleasure or danger, read immodest books or songs to yourself or others, kept indecent pictures, willingly given ear to or taken pleasure in hearing loose discourse, etc., or sought to see or hear anything that was immodest? How often? Have you exposed yourself to wanton company, or played at any indecent play, or frequented masquerades, balls, comedies, etc., with danger to your chastity? How often? Have you been guilty of any immodest discourses, wanton stories, jests, or songs, or words of double meaning? How often? And before how many? And were the persons before whom you spoke or sung married or single? For all this you are obliged to confess by reason of the evil thoughts these things are apt to create in the hearers. Have you abused the marriage bed by, and then it's blotted out, or by any pollutions, or been guilty of any irregularity in order, and that's blotted out? How often? Have you without a just cause refused the marriage debt? And what sin may have followed from it? How often? Have you debauched any person that was innocent before? Have you forced any person or deluded anyone by deceitful promises, or designed or desired so to do? How often? You are obliged to make satisfaction for the injury you have done. Have you taught any one evil which he knew not before, or carried any one to lewd houses? How often? I mean, this goes on and on and on. What do you think this does to the minds of these poor women and poor young girls when these priests are hammering them with these filthy, disgusting questions? Is it any wonder why Roman Catholic nations are rampant with prostitution? It's the priests that have ruined the women with these kinds of questions. And all of this is validated by the Council of Trent as it protects the office of priest as he exercises his works under the authority of the Pope of Rome, whom Jeremiah Crowley called the chief of white slavers and the high priest of intrigue. We continue on with a few final verses here from Trent. Whoever shall affirm that the satisfactions by which penitents redeem themselves from sin through Christ Jesus are no part of the service of God, but on the contrary, human traditions which obscure the doctrine of grace and the worship of God and the benefits of the death of Christ, which all of Bible-believing men would say, let him be accursed. We are all accursed under the Council of Trent, and therefore the Jesuits, pursuant to their fourth vow, and pursuant to the doctrines of Thomas Aquinas, as I read last night, can kill us with war, famine, a medical inquisition like they have been doing to us in the United States for the last 100 years, killing us with allopathic medicine. It's all an inquisition. Serving us foods, having all these foods in these supermarkets full of estrogens and pesticides and herbicides so that we can all come down with cancer, vaccinating us when we're dear sweet children where we have no disease really, so that we can get cancer in our later life, or even more recently get autism and ADD because of these stinking, filthy, wicked vaccinations that they intimidate us to get, so we can send our children to public school where they can be taught, where they cannot read the Bible at all. It's an inquisition on a grand scale beyond our wildest dreams, and it opens before us as we read the doctrines of Trent. It's the Counter-reformation, to revert the world back to the Dark Ages, when the Pope was the king of the world. Well, now that we've examined Trent and see what the Jesuits seek to enforce, and this is just a tiny tidbit of it, we shall go now to Reverend Wiley. I won't use the word Reverend. There's only one Reverend. It's the Lord. Holy and Reverend is his name, Psalm 111. We will go to this minister, James Wiley, and what he wrote in his great work, History of Protestantism, 2nd volume, book 15, on the Jesuits. Here are a few more quotes from him. He writes on page 394, and I have this all copied in my 3rd edition of Vatican Assassins in the back. Quote, "So stood the Society of Jesus, a deep and wide gulf separated from all other communities and interests. Set free from the love of family, from the ties of kindred, from the claims of country, and from the rule of law, careless of the happiness they might destroy, and the misery and pain and woe they might inflict, the members were at liberty, without control or challenge, to pursue their terrible end, which was the dethronement of every other power, the extinction of every other interest but their own, and the reduction of mankind into abject slavery, that on the ruins of the liberty, the virtue, and the happiness of the world they might raise themselves to supreme, unlimited domination," or dominion. But we have not yet detailed all the appliances with which the Jesuits were careful to furnish themselves for the execution of their unspeakably audacious and diabolical design. In the midst of these abysses, there opens to our eye a yet profounder abyss. To enjoy exemption from all human authority and from every earthly law was to them a small matter. Nothing would satisfy their lust for license save the entire abrogation of the moral law, and nothing would appease their pride save to trample underfoot the majesty of heaven. We now come to speak of the moral code of the Jesuits. And I would like to comment just a little bit on this. The Jesuits are indeed above the law. The Jesuits run the Department of Justice. I call it the Department of Injustice. For if you go to the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C., to the gate that opens at the front door, you will see the symbols of the Roman fascists. A bundle of rods with an axe protruding on both sides of each gate. This is the symbol of the Jesuit fascism. This is the symbol that the Jesuit Order's Knights of Columbus use, the Roman fascists. You can see it on any one of their lodges or temples or whatever you want to call it. The Jesuits in this country are above the law, exactly as Wiley said they would be in 1878. One would think that this was license enough. What more can the Jesuit need, or what more can he possibly have, seeing by a little effort of invention he can overlap every human and divine barrier and commit the most horrible crimes on the mightiest possible scale, and neither feel remorse or conscience nor fear of punishment? That's the Jesuit. When the Jesuit is given the order to maim, destroy, steal, kill, he does so with impunity and with no conscience, as a stick in the hand of an old man, as Ignatius Loyola said. This is how they killed John F. Kennedy. This is how they killed Malcolm X. That's right. Cardinal Spellman oversaw it all with his Jesuit coadjutors in the Dallas and New York police departments, in the CIA, and the FBI. That's the kind of power Rome has in America, and if it has that kind of power in America, it's the same exact power in England, it's the same exact power in Russia, it's the same exact power in China. There is no difference. There are no enemies at the top in government. They're all ruled by the Jesuits. We continue on with Wiley's work. On page 398, he, the Jesuit, there are three great rules of the Code of the Jesuits, which we have stated in the foregoing chapter. Namely, 1, that the end justifies the means. 2, that it is safe to do any action if it be probably right, although it may be more probably wrong. And 3, that if one know if one know to direct the intention aright, there is no deed, be its moral character what it may, which one may not do, may seem to give a license of acting so immense that to add thereto were an altogether superfluous and indeed an impossible task. But if the liberty with which these three maxims endow the Jesuit cannot be made larger, its particular applications may nevertheless be made more pointed, and the man who holds back from using it in all its extent may be emboldened, despite his remaining scruples or the dullness of his intellectual perceptions, to avail himself to the utmost of the advantages it offers, for the greater glory of God. Ad majorem Dei gloriam, and this is the Jesuits' greatest favorite phrase, ad majorem Dei gloriam. Everything is ad majorem Dei gloriam, for the greater glory of God. But you see, it's not the God of heaven, it's the God that sits in Rome. It's the Pope. Everything the Jesuits do is for the greater glory, for the extending of his spiritual and temporal power. It's for the greater glory of the Pope of Rome. So you see, because he is God to the Jesuits, he dresses in white, he is divine. He is the one who's recently said all other branches of Christianity are not Christian because they are not part of the Roman Catholic institution, and anything apart from the Roman Catholic institution cannot be saved, cannot be justified. There is no salvation outside the Roman Catholic Church. And when Benedict XVI said this 2 days ago, he did nothing but repeat the doctrines of Trent. Wiley repeats the same. The Jesuit, he is to be taught, not merely by general rules, but by specific examples, how he may sin and yet not become sinful, how he may break the law and yet not suffer the penalty. But further, these sons of Loyola are the kings of the world. But further, these sons of Loyola are the kings of the world and the sole heirs of all its wealth, honors, and pleasures, and whatever law, custom, sacred and venerable office, august and kingly authority may stand between them and their rightful lordship over mankind, they are at liberty to throw down and tread into the dust as a vile and accursed thing. The moral maxims of the Jesuits are to be put in force against kings as well as against peasants. This was written in 1878, when the Jesuits were already ruling England at this time and when they were ruling America at this time. Wiley was right when he said, these sons of Loyola are the kings of the world. We go on to page 399 of Wiley's History of the Protestantism, Volume 2. We have only to look around, and on every hand the melancholy monuments of those doctrines meet our affected sight. To what country of Europe shall we turn where we are not able to track the Jesuits by his bloody footprints? What page of modern history shall we open and not read fresh proofs that the papal doctrine of killing excommunicated kings was not meant to slumber in forgotten times, but to be acted out in the living world? Yeah, in 1963 with JFK. We see Henry III falling by their dagger. Henry IV perishes by the same consecrated weapon. These are the kings of France. The King of Portugal dies by their order. The great Prince of Orange, William of Orange I, is dispatched, murdered by their agent, shot down at the door of his own dining room, yes, with 3 poison bullets. How many assassins they sent to England to murder Elizabeth, history attests. That she escaped their machinations is one of the marvels of history. Nor is it only the palaces of monarchs into which they have crept with their doctrines of murder and assassination. The very sanctuary of their own popes they have defiled with blood. We behold Clement XIV signing the order for the banishment of the Jesuits. That was Dominic Ac Redemptor Noster, when it was the bull of suppression and extinction in 1773. And soon thereafter he is overtaken by their vengeance and dies by poison. In the gunpowder plot, we see them deliberately planning to destroy at one blow the nobility and gentry of England when they sought to blow up the Westminster Abbey. To them we owe those civil wars which for so many years drenched with blood the fair provinces of France. By the way, with regard to the gunpowder plot, the movie V for Vendetta denies the Jesuit hand in it, which shows you the power of the Jesuit order ruling Hollywood from one of their great churches in Hollywood. To them we owe those civil wars for so many years drenched with the blood of the fair provinces of France. Yes, when they destroyed out the French Huguenots, they were the French Calvinists, The Jesuits killed them out, especially with the revocation of the Edict of Nantes in 1685. Drove them out, killed out the finest population of France, reduced it to penury, and for 100 years the Bible was a forbidden book in France throughout the entire reign of the wicked King Louis XIV, who is also glorified in one of DiCaprio's movies on the Jesuits in Hollywood. Philip II and the Jesuits share between them the guilt of the Invincible Armada, which, instead of inflicting the measureless ruin and havoc which its authors intended by a most merciful providence, became the means of exhausting the treasures and overthrowing the prestige of Spain. This is when the Jesuits sent the Spanish Armada against England, seeking to overthrow the Reformation, kill all the Protestants, and restore Romanism as the religion of England, and also killing Elizabeth I, which the Jesuits called the Witch of the North and the Bastard Queen. We go on in Wiley's History of Protestantism. Shrewd, practical, and precise are the instructions of the Jesuits. First of all, they are told to select the best points in that great field, all of which they are in due time to subjugate and possess. The field is Europe, the term Christendom. They are to begin by establishing convents or colleges in the chief cities, the great centers of population and wealth secured. The smaller places will be easily occupied. Charles Chiniquy, who was a priest before he got saved, wrote in 50 Years in the Church of Rome that the Jesuits marched to the conquering of America's cities. And where do you find the most of Jesuit power and the most Roman Catholic immigrants who have been used to serve the purposes of the papacy? In the major cities, primarily of the North and in the West. New York City, Washington, D.C., Albany, New York, Cincinnati, Philadelphia. Philadelphia is entirely Roman Catholic and black city. Baltimore, Roman Catholic and black city. All these cities have been conquered by the Jesuits. And they control them lock, stock, and barrel. And by controlling all the major cities, New York City, they control all the commerce of the nation. Whoever, according to Justin Fulton in his great work, Rome on the Potomac, Washington in the Lap of Rome. Washington in the Lap of Rome was his great work. He said that whoever rules Washington, D.C. and New York City controls America and the commerce and politics of this country. The Jesuits rule them both. That's where they brought all of our gold after they stole it out of Fort Knox using several presidents over 17 years, and they put it in their New York Federal Reserve Bank in their gold vault with 600,000 gold bars, the largest gold hoard in the world. We've been swindled out of as American people. That's our gold. We mined it. We minted it. We made those coins. And then the Jesuits had it stored at Fort Knox and then ultimately stole it out of Fort Knox and put it in their Federal Reserve Bank, their private bank. We have been completely raped, pillaged, and plundered by the Jesuits, and we own nothing. All of us are broke. All we have are worthless Federal Reserve notes. No gold, no silver coin, as mandated by the U.S. Constitution, because the U.S. Constitution is a dead letter.
If you'd like to get a copy of this program, there are a few ways that we can help you. You may subscribe at LibertyRadioLive.com for only $45 a month, and you'll receive an MP3 CD weekly of all the First Amendment Rights Media Group programs. As a
Brother Jon Phelps, and we are back with our study of the Reformation and the Jesuit Order's Counter-reformation, which we experience every day here in the United States and as we hear of the news in the world. Reading from James J. Wiley's great masterpiece, The History of Protestantism, Volume 2. We now are in Chapter 8, The Jesuits in Europe. Quote, "The soldiers of Loyola are about to go forth. Before beginning the campaign, we see their chief assembling them and pointing out the field on which their prowess is to be displayed. The nations of Christendom are in revolt, namely the Protestant nations. It will be theirs to subjugate them and lay them once more bound in chains at the feet of the papal see. They must not faint. The arms he has provided them with are amply sufficient for the arduous warfare on which he sends them. Clad in that armor and wielding it as he has been at pains to instruct them, they will expel knowledge as night chases away the day. Liberty will die wherever their foot treads, and in the ancient darkness they will be able to rear again the fallen throne of the great hierarch of Rome, the Pope. But if the service is hard, the wages will be ample. As the saviors of that throne, they will be greater than it. And though meanwhile their work is to be done in great show of humility and poverty, the silver and the gold of Christendom will in the end be theirs. The silver and the gold of Christendom, Protestant nations, will in the end be theirs. That's the reason why the Jesuits and their SS stole all the gold out of Denmark during World War II. Denmark was a Protestant, a white Protestant nation, a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant nation, and when the Nazis came in there, the SS-SD, working on behalf of the papacy, stole all the gold from the central bank in Denmark. Just as Wiley said they would. They will be the lords of the lands and palaces, the masters of the bodies and the souls of its inhabitants, and nothing of all that the heart can desire will be withholden from them, if only they will obey him, the Jesuit general, or Ignatius Loyola. And so this is their grand design. This is the design they are upon today, and this is the design they will continue to do until there ceases to be a Protestant Reformation, until there ceases to be Protestant nations, until there ceases to be a Bible openly circulating among any people, and until the Pope becomes universal monarch of the world, and they will have acquired their goal. Wiley continues, the Jesuits rapidly multiplied, and we are now to follow them in their peregrinations over Europe. Going forth in little bands, animated with an entire devotion to their general, schooled in all the arts which could help to further their mission, they planted themselves in a few years in all the countries of Christendom and made their presence felt in the turning of the tide of Protestantism, which till then had been on the flow. There was no disguise they could not assume, and therefore there was no place into which they could not penetrate. They could enter unheard the closet of the monarch or the cabinet of the statesman. They could sit unseen in convocation or general assembly and mingle unsuspected in the deliberations and debates. There was no tongue they could not speak and no creed they could not profess, and thus there was no people among whom they might not sojourn, and no church whose membership they might not enter, and whose functions they might not discharge. That means there are Jesuits who are in Protestant and Baptist churches acting as pastors and preachers. They could execrate the Pope with the Lutheran and swear the solemn league with the Covenanter. They had their men of learning and eloquence for the halls of nobles and the courts of kings. They're men of science and letters for the education of youth. Yeah, men like Francis Bacon. They're unpolished but ready orators to harangue the crowd. And they're plain, unlettered monks to visit the cottages of the peasantry and the workshops of the artisan. Quote, I know these men, quote, said Joseph II of Austria, writing to Choiseul, the prime minister of Louis XV, that prime minister having expelled the Jesuits from France. I know these men as well as anyone can do, all the schemes they have carried on, and the pains they have taken to spread darkness over the earth, as well as their efforts to rule and embroil Europe from Cape Finisterre to Spitzbergen. In China they were mandarins, in France academians, courtiers and confessors, in Spain and Portugal grandees, and in Paraguay kings. Remember, they ruled the Paraguayan reductions, which totaled in excess of 200,000 native Guaranian Indians that were working on these reductions, these kibbutzes, these communes, making hides and tallow and making violins and putting all these things in international commerce and trade for the Jesuit black ships so they could make billions and continue their wars against Protestant nations and the racial Jews. Had not my grand uncle Joseph I became emperor, we had in all probability seen in Germany too a Malagrida or an Alavernos. In order that they might be at liberty to visit what city and diocese they pleased, they were exempted from episcopal jurisdiction. That means that no Jesuit is subject to any priest, to any bishop, to any archbishop, or to any cardinal. The Jesuit order is a jurisdiction within a jurisdiction. They are the police. They are the overseers. They are the SS of the Vatican. As the SS oversaw the Nazi Party, the Jesuit order oversees the Roman hierarchy. And any honest priest will tell you, when a Jesuit enters his church, he gets in a cold sweat. I was told this by a prominent Roman Catholic in Reno. After which, the next question he asked me is, why are you still alive? So the Jesuits, again, are above the law, and they are above the Roman hierarchy. They are only subject to their immediate superior, and if necessary, the general himself. This arrangement was resisted at first by certain prelates, but it was universally conceded at last, and it greatly facilitated the wide and rapid diffusion of the Jesuit corps. Extraordinary success attended their first efforts throughout all Italy. Designed for the common people, the order found equal acceptance from princes and nobles. So yes, they were financed by these princes and nobles. They were given wonderful castles and lands. In London, they were given Stonyhurst by Thomas Weld. They were given and given and given and given by wealthy Roman Catholic lords and dames. And it's by this way that they became financially so powerful and politically dominating. Today, we look in America. Who are the rich men in this country? It's not the Jews. It's the Irish Roman Catholics. Men like William F. Buckley, a multi-billionaire, CFR member, Knight of Malta, Irish Roman Catholic, host of Firing Line, the man who started the magazine that is today considered to be a right-wing magazine that Ann Coulter and all the Fox people just love, the National Review. So it's these kinds of men that prop up the Pope. Franz von Papen, another multi-millionaire Knight of Malta of Germany, personal friends of Pius XII. Who does he bring to power? Who is the one that's brought to power in 1933 by Franz von Papen? Adolf Hitler. Because Hitler was the Pope's boy to carry out the Council of Trent, which I just read. Wiley continues. And I would like to go now to the Inquisition that the Jesuit ran. Because wherever there are Jesuits, there will always be an Inquisition. Wherever there are Jesuits, there will always be an Inquisition. In Nazi Germany, the Jesuits ran the SS and SD, and it was the SS who ran the concentration camps. In Stalin's Russia, USSR, the Jesuits ran the NKVD. and therefore there was the Gulag system all throughout Russia, especially in Siberia, an old Jesuit stronghold. In America, it is coming to our country, and it will be the Jesuits are controlling the Department of Homeland Security. The Department of Homeland Security will be America's SS, America's KGB or NKVD, because you see, it was the Jesuit John C. Gannon, who is a former CIA officer, given the highest award that could be given for civilian performance by George Bush. He was the one who really founded and is the backbone of the Department of Homeland Security. And this John C. Gannon is, yes, a Knight of Malta, CFR member, a former member of the Jesuit Volunteer Corps, an adjunct professor at Georgetown University, and an Irish Roman Catholic. These are the men of power in America. We continue. We leave the torture chamber in Bavaria to visit the Inquisition chamber. We go eastward about half a mile, keeping close to the northern wall of the city, till we come to an old tower styled in the common parlance of Nuremberg, the Max Tower. Interesting that it was Nuremberg in which the anti-Jew laws were passed by the Nazis, because Nuremberg was southern Germany, Roman Catholic, and a place of Inquisition for centuries. We pull the bell, and the iron handle and chain of which are seen suspended beside the doorpost. The cicerone appears, carrying a bunch of keys, a lantern, and some half-dozen candles. The lantern is to show us our way, and the candles are for the purpose of being lighted and struck up at the turnings in the dark underground passages which we are about to traverse. Should mischance befall our lantern, these tapers, the beacon lights in the narrow creek, will pilot us safely back into the day. So they're going into a pitch-dark tavern here. The cicerone, selecting the largest room from the bunch of keys, inserts it in the lock of the massy portal before which we stand. Bolt after bolt is turned, and the door, which hoarse, heavy groan as it turns on its hinge, opens slowly to us. We begin to descend. We go down one flight of steps. We go down a second. We descend yet a third. And now we pause a moment. The darkness is intense, for here never came the faintest glimmer of day, but a gleam thrown forward from the lantern showed us that we were arrived at the entrance of a horizontal, narrow passage. We could see by the flickering of the light upon its sides and roof that the corridor we were traversing was hewn out of rock. We had gone only a few paces when we were brought up before a massy door. As far as the dim light served us, we could see the door, old, powdery with dust, and partly worm-eaten. Passing in, the corridor continued, and we went forward other 3 paces or so when we found ourselves before a second door. We opened and shut it behind us as we did the first. Again we began to thread our way. A third door stopped us. We opened and closed it in like manner. Every step was carrying us deeper into the heart of the rock and multiplying the barriers between us and the upper world. We were shut in with the thick darkness and the awful silence. We began to realize what must have been the feelings of some unhappy disciple of the gospel, surprised by the familiars of the Holy Office of the Inquisition, led through the midnight streets of Nuremberg, conducted to Max Tower, led down flight after flight of stairs, and along this horizontal shaft in the rock, and at every few paces a massy door with its locks and bolts closing behind him. He must have felt how utterly he was beyond the reach of human pity and human aid. No cry, however piercing, could reach the ear of man through those roofs of rock. He was entirely in the power of those who had brought him thither. At last we come to a side door in the narrow passage. We halted, applied the key, and the door, with its ancient mold, creaking harshly as if moving on a hinge long disused, opened to let us in. Any of you ever see the movie The Pit and the Pendulum? Years ago it was made. This is what's being described. We found ourselves in a rather roomy chamber. It might be about 12 feet square. This was the chamber of question. Along one side of the apartment ran a low platform. There sat of old the inquisitors, 3 in number. The first a divine, the second a casuist, and the third a civilian. The only occupant of that platform was the crucifix. Yes, the pagan crucifix, or image of the Savior on the cross, which still remained. The 6 candles that usually burned before the Holy Fathers were, of course, extinguished, but our lanterns supplied their place and showed us the grim furnishings of the apartment. In the middle was the horizontal rack, or bed of torture, on which the victim was stretched till bone started from bone, and his dislocated frame became the seat of agony, which was suspended only when it had reached a pitch that threatened death. Leaning against the wall of the chamber was the upright rack, with its simpler, but as an instrument of torture not less effectual than the horizontal one. There was the iron chain which wound over a pulley and hauled up the victim to the vaulted roof, and there were the 2 great stone weights which, tied to his feet, and the iron cord let go, brought him down with a jerk and dislocated his limbs, while the spiky rollers, which he grazed in his descent, cut into and excoriated his back, leaving his body a bloody, dislocated mass. Here, too, was the cradle of which we have made mention above, amply garnished within with cruel knobs, on which the sufferer, tied hand and foot, was thrown at every movement by the machine, to be bruised all over and brought forth discolored, swollen, bleeding, but still living. Yeah, it's like being thrown in a dryer and being put in that dryer for a half an hour. And by the time you come out, if you're still alive, you're all bruised and broken and swollen. That's what they did in what was called the cradle. All around, ready to hand, were hung the minor instruments of torture. There were screws and thumbkins for the fingers, and thumb screws. The Nazis used thumb screws, and so did the KGB, and so did the CIA. Spiked collars for the neck, iron boots for the legs, gags for the mouth, clothes to cover the face, and permit the slow percolation of water, drop by drop, down the throat of the person undergoing this form of torture. There were rollers set round the spikes for bruising the arms and back. There were iron scourges, pincers, and tongs for tearing out the tongue, slitting the nose and ears. This was done to Pym during the English Reformation. And otherwise disfiguring and mangling the body till it was horrible and horrifying to look upon it. There were other things of which an expert could tell the name and the use. Had these instruments a tongue, and could the history of this chamber be written, how awful the tale. We shall suppose that all this has been gone through, that the confessor has been stretched on the bed of torture, has been gashed, broken, mangled, and yet by power given him from above has not denied his Savior. He has been, quote, tortured, not accepting deliverance, unquote, as the Scripture says. What further punishment has the Holy Office in reserve for those from whom its torments have failed to extort a recantation? These dreadful dungeons furnish us with the means of answering this question. We return to the narrow passage and go forward a little way. Every few paces there comes a door. Originally strong and massy, and garnished with great iron knobs, but now old and moldy and creaking when opened with a noise painfully loud in the deep stillness. The windings are numerous, but at every turning of the passage a lighted candle is placed, lest peradventure the way should be missed, and the road back to the living would be lost forever. A few steps are taken downwards very cautiously, for a lantern can barely show the ground. Here there is a vaulted chamber, entirely dug out of the living rock, except the roof, which is formed of hewn stone. It contains an iron image of the Virgin. This is called the Iron Maiden. I remember an album I had when I was growing up, when I was in the rock culture, when the album was put out by the Iron Butterfly, and that album was called the Iron Maiden. We continue. And on the opposite wall, suspended by an iron hook, is a lamp which, when lighted, shows the goodly proportions of Our Lady, quote-unquote. On the instant of touching a spring, the image flings open its arms, which resemble the doors of a cupboard, and which are seen to be stuck full on the inside with knives, pointers, each about a foot in length. Some of these knives are so placed as to enter the eyes of those whom the image enfolded in its embrace. Others are set so as to penetrate the ears and brain, others to pierce the breast, and others again to gore the abdomen, yes, and the groin. The person who had passed through the terrible ordeal of the question chamber, but had made no recantation, would be led along the tortuous passage by which we had come, and ushered into this vault, where the first object that would greet his eye, the pale light of the lamp falling on it, would be the Iron Virgin, also called the Iron Maiden. He would be hidden. He would be bidden to stand right in front of the image. The spring would be touched by the executioner. The Virgin would fling open her arms, and the wretched victim would straightway be forced within them. Another spring was then touched. The Virgin closed upon her victim. A strong wooden beam, fastened at one end to the wall by a movable joint, the other placed against the doors of the iron image, was worked by a screw. And as the beam was pushed out, the spiky arms of the Virgin slowly but irresistibly closed upon the man and did their work. When the dreadful business was ended, it needed not that the executioner should put himself to the trouble of making the Virgin unclasp the mangled carcass of her victim. Provision had been made for its quick and secret disposal. At the touching of a third spring, the floor of the image would slide aside, and the body of the victim drop down the mouth of a perpendicular shaft in the rock. Down this pit, at great depth, would be discerned the shimmer of water. A canal had been made to flow underneath the vault where stood the Iron Virgin, and when she had done her work upon those who were delivered over to her tender mercies, she let them fall with quick descent and sullen plunge into the canal underneath, where they were floated to the Pigrets, and from the Pigrets to the Rhine, and by the Rhine to the ocean, there to sleep beside the dust of Huss and Jerome. This, dear friends, is the holy office of the Inquisition. This is what the Jesuits instituted in Nuremberg, Germany, and all throughout Europe. And this is what they always will have wherever they are in control of a government. And that is why we will have an Inquisition here in America, because it is here that they are in complete and total control of the American government through the Council on Foreign Relations. Such is the history of Protestantism by Wiley. Now we shall go to a book that I include on the 13 Old Books with my CD, and this book is called The Crisis, The Enemies of America Unmasked. And we shall see now that it was written in 1855 by Wayne Lawrence, a great patriot, who exposed the power of the Jesuits, and which this book is completely impossible to find. In Chapter 1, we read Jesuit Influence. An American gentleman was passenger on board a merchant ship, bound from London to Rio de Janeiro. There were among the passengers Englishmen, Germans, Frenchmen, Spaniards, and Portuguese, but the person we refer to was the only American. Between himself and the English gentleman, there were frequent discussions about politics, to which such of the other passengers as could speak English would listen, sometimes taken apart. Of course, our American was a great friend of the institutions of his own country and defended republican forms of government, freedom of speech and of the press, the vote by ballot, and all the other elements of popular sovereignty through thick and thin. Assailed on every side, he found his office of champion of freedom no cincture. Every calm morning and every pleasant evening witnessed a new controversy on the deck or in the cabin, but he manfully held his ground against a host of adversaries, and being fluent in speech, strong in argument, skilled in logic, and full of lively and sarcastic humor, he generally came out of the debate with honor, taking care always to terminate the action at precisely the right moment and to quit the field with flying colors. Among the persons who listened with the greatest attention to these debates was a lean, bilious-looking old Frenchman who always took care to be present and who showed by his look and manner that he was deeply interested in politics, although he never by any chance uttered an opinion or made a remark on political subjects in the general circle of the passengers. In point of fact, this man was a Roman Catholic priest, a Jesuit of high standing who was going to some station in South America in obedience to an order from his superior. He was a cosmopolite, indeed, a world citizen. Though not much past the middle point of life, he was rather aged in appearance in consequence of the great variety and extent of the missions which he had performed in all quarters of the world and in every kind of climate, from Canada to Calcutta, from the breezy heights of the Andes to the unwholesome marshes of Java, by sea and by land, in season and out of season. This man had journeyed on the secret errands of his order, speaking fluently a dozen different languages and possessing the most perfect power of dissimulation, as well as the most thorough devotedness to the Church and those carefully trained habits of obedience which are so essential to the character of an able and faithful Jesuit. He had at length become one of the most accomplished men of his age. As he listened to the conversation of the American passenger, he could not help noticing that he was gradually making converts to Republican views. Many of these passengers, he observed, sought private interviews with the American, and by careful eavesdropping he ascertained that their object was to ask questions about his country and gain information respecting the actual working of the American attempt at self-government. When the passage was nearly over, the Frenchman, happening to be alone with the American in a retired part of the deck where their conversation could not be overheard, commenced a quiet chat with him. Addressing him in English, which he spoke with ease and precision, he thanked him with apparent cordiality for the entertainment he had derived from his conversation, or rather eloquent haranguing, to the other passengers during the voyage. He professed to have enjoyed their debates very greatly, and gave the American due credit for his wit, his logic, his humor, his address, and his unbounded good nature. The American was much pleased at his compliments, for he had conceived a great respect for the silent and attentive auditor, and in fact had in his own secret mind set him down as a hopeful convert to Americanism. He thanked him, therefore, with much feeling for his good opinion, at the same time disclaiming any merit for success in defending a truth so self-evident as that which is expressed in these few words, that a nation ought to govern itself, and that by the popular vote of its own citizens. This, said the Jesuit with a quiet smile, you suppose to be the system of your own country? By the way, this is 1855. I do not suppose it, said the American. I know it. Now, said the Jesuit, listen to me a few moments, and I will tell you what I know. Your president is elected by the conclave of cardinals at Rome, the same who elect the Pope. Your people nominate the candidates. Our confidential agents select from the number the one whom they believe to be the most favorable to the interests of the Church. His name with those of the other candidates is reported to the cardinals and the Pope. When their decision is announced to the confidential friends of the Pope and the cardinals in the United States, they send forth their orders through the priests, and the whole Roman Catholic vote is thrown for the candidate who is favored by the Church. This is how Henry Clay lost his election. He, of course, is always elected. Your parties are so equally divided on politics that this Roman Catholic vote, which is cast on purely religious considerations, is always sufficient to turn the scale, unquote. The American looked rather blank at this announcement. He was quite taken back. Especially was he staggered by
Fight the fight. We are here to equip you. Let our motto be, don't tread on me. LibertyRadioLive.com. If you'd like to get a copy of this program, there are a few ways that we can help you. You may subscribe at LibertyRadioLive.com for only $45 a month. And you'll receive an MP3 CD weekly of all the First Amendment Rights Media Group programs. As a bonus, we'll send you a password for our audio archives online. That's a $15 value. Or you can request any month of any program on one MP3 CD for a minimum donation of only $20. Or any single program on tape, MP3 CD, or CD for only $15. You can do all this online at LibertyRadioLive.com. Just follow the instructions to make a donation or subscribe. Don't do Internet? Then call 559-781-3773, 559-781-3773, and we'll be honored to help you. Thank you from all of us here at the First Amendment Rights Media Group.
Now listen to me. The Bible says, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's. I want you to know that a corporation is Caesar.
Government takeover of the church. This DVD is the most powerful tool we have for waking up those asleep in the pews. The Scripture calls for His people to come out of her. The corporate church is the apostate church, the whore that rides the beast. Make copies and give them away to your corporate church friends and loved ones. The truth will make them free. They will watch the DVD, Government Takeover of the Church. Who will tell them if not you?
Get this DVD for a donation of $25 from LibertyRadioLive.com. Order online today or call 559-781-3773.
Now listen to me.
If you read the history books, the most often asked questions of Southerners was this: why did you fight? And the most often given answer is, because you're here. In other words, the South did not invade the North invaded the South.
Was it the Civil War or War of Federal Aggression? John Weaver sets the record straight in this DVD series on the Civil War from the Old Past Christian History Conference. Was there a war to set the slaves free? Or was it a war to enslave us all? Get this DVD and judge for yourself. War of Federal Aggression. The truth seems strange only because we've been indoctrinated with a fiction. War of Federal Aggression. Get it today.
Get this DVD for a donation of $25 from LibertyRadioLive.com. Order online today or call 559-781-3773. 559-781-3773.
Some of them are living an illusion, bounded by the darkness of their minds. In their eyes it's nation against nation, with racial pride, sad they hide, thinking only of themselves.
Welcome back. Brother Eric Jon Phelps. Our lesson with regard to the Jesuit order, its purpose, its quest, and now we are going to finish up what we were reading concerning the American and the Jesuit. The American looked rather blank at this announcement. He was quite taken back that the Pope and the College of Cardinals chose the American presidents as early as 1855. Especially was he staggered by the recollection that the candidate for the presidency, who was sustained by the Irish and German votes, was generally successful. He courteously thanked the Jesuit for the valuable information which he had communicated, and during the short remainder of the voyage, he abstained from talking politics and gave himself up to reflection. Let us also reflect a little on the Jesuit story. Perhaps it was a hoax, or a mere idle brag intended to annoy and mortify the American. But is it not the main point of his declaration true? Is it not true that in many very essential points this country is governed by foreign influence? Is it not even highly probable that Roman Catholic prelates have a voice in the selection of candidates for very high as well as low offices, even for that of the President himself? Was not Mr. Polk a man of no mark as a statesman and comparatively unknown to the country, elected in opposition to Henry Clay, immeasurably the most able and popular man in the United States? And was not this accomplished by the Roman Catholics voting against him en masse because he was suspected, and only suspected, of favoring the Native American movement? By the way, the Native American movement is what we all should be. America should be for the Americans. And that if immigrants come here, they adopt American ways, they speak English, they learn the Bible in public schools, and they become nationalists. The movers of this foreign political machinery in this country are the members of two secret societies. One is composed of the regular Roman Catholic priests, always and everywhere a secret society. The other is the Society of Jesus, as it is profanely called. In other words, the Society of Jesuits. All history, past and present, gives assurance that these precious gentlemen are not too surreptitiously pious to take a hand in the game of politics. So we give the character of the Order of Jesuits in the words of one of the ablest and best informed historians of the present day. Quote, "In the 16th century, the pontificate, exposed to new dangers more formidable than had ever before threatened it, was saved by a new religious order, which was animated by intense enthusiasm and organized with exquisite skill. When the Jesuits came to the rescue of the papacy, they found it in extreme peril, but from that moment the tide of battle turned. Protestantism, which had, during the whole generation, carried all before it, was stopped in its progress and rapidly beaten back from the foot of the Alps to the shores of the Baltic. Before the order had existed 100 years, it had filled the whole world with memorials of great things done and suffered for the faith." We also have to remember the 30 Years' War that they started. "No religious community could produce a list of men so variously distinguished. None had extended its operations over so vast a space. Yet in none had there ever been such perfect unity of feeling and action. There was no region of the globe, no walk of speculative or active life in which Jesuits were not to be found. They guided the councils of kings. They deciphered Latin inscriptions. They observed the motions of Jupiter's satellites. They published whole libraries, controversy, casuistry, history, treatises, and optics, alchic odes, editions of the fathers, catechisms, and lampoons. The liberal education of youth was passed almost entirely into their hands, as it is in America today, and was conducted by them with great ability. They seem to have discovered the precise point in which intellectual culture can be carried without risk of intellectual emancipation. Enmity itself was compelled to own that. In the art of managing and forming the tender mind, they had no equals. The Jesuits have a saying, as the twig is bent, so grows the tree. They also say, give me your son as a youth, and by the age of 7, he will be a Roman Catholic devoted to us for the rest of his life. With still greater assiduity and still greater separation, they devoted themselves to the ministry of the confessional. Throughout Catholic Europe, the secrets of every government and almost every family of note were in their keeping. They glided from one Protestant country to another under innumerable disguises, as gay cavaliers, as simple rustics, as Puritan preachers. They wandered to countries which neither mercantile avidity nor liberal curiosity had ever impelled any stranger to explore. They were to be found in the garb of mandarins, superintending the observatory in Peking. They were to be found spade in hand, teaching the rudiments of agriculture to the savages of Paraguay. Yet whatever might be their residence, whatever might be their employment, their spirit was the same, entire devotion to the common cause, implicit obedience to the central authority. None of them had chosen his dwelling place or his avocation for himself. Whether the Jesuit should live under the Arctic Circle or the equator, whether he should pass his life in arranging gems and collating manuscripts of the Vatican, or in persuading naked barbarians in the southern hemisphere not to eat each other, were matters which he left with profound submission to the decision of others. If he was wanted at Lima, he was on the Atlantic in the next fleet. If he was wanted at Baghdad, he was toiling through the desert with the next caravan. If his ministry was needed in some country where his life was more insecure than that of a wolf, or it was a crime to harbor him, where the heads and quarters of his brethren fixed on the public places showed him what he had to expect. He went without remonstrance or hesitation to his doom. But with this admirable energy, disinterestedness, and self-devotion, which were characteristics of his society, great vices were mingled. It was alleged, and not without foundation, that the ardent public spirit which made the Jesuit regardless of his ease, of his liberty, and of his life, made him also regardless of truth and of mercy, that no means which could promote the interest of his religion seemed to him unlawful, and that by the interest of his religion he too often meant the interest of his society. This is the Jesuit, and we have Jesuit coadjutors, men like G. Gordon Liddy. We continue on. We now want to evaluate, in these last few minutes, the Jesuit position on the Jew. The Jesuit position on the Jew. We read from E. Boyd Barrett, a former Jesuit, in a book that he wrote after he left the order, Rome Stoops to Conquer. Page 179, quote, "The Jesuits, as is well known, exercised immense influence in the government of the Church and the formation of its policies and doctrines. They stand ever at the Pope's right hand, his intellectual and spiritual bodyguard, and they compose the Pope's bodyguard of lies for his protection. The mighty defenders of the faith, they are as a body, changeless, as the Church herself. Only in a slightly lesser degree than the Church do they lay claim to divine protection, divine inspiration, and infallibility. Owing to an earlier experience of a painful kind which was all but disastrous to the order, and which was due to a group of Spanish Jesuits of Jewish descent who threatened to dismember the order, the Jesuits as a body have conceived and fostered an intense animosity against the Jews. Never since the days of the Great Storm, which was in the 1590s, as Cardinal Tollitz's revolt was called, has anyone of Jewish blood or descent been admitted into the order." Remember, this was written prior to 1946. "Never since that day has the order ceased to pursue vindictively the Jews. The spirit of the order can be gleaned from the extraordinary prayer of the greatest of Jesuit saints, Francis Xavier, quote, 'Put me some place where there are no Jews or Muslims,' cried Francis. 'Put me some place where there are no Jews or Muslim,' cried Francis." Throws great light on the present crusade today. The present writer, who spent 20 years in the Jesuit order, can recall no single occasion on which a word of praise for Jewish achievement or a word of sympathy for Jewish suffering was uttered by a Jesuit. The Jesuits, in the days when they controlled every Catholic court in Europe, and when as an order they were swollen with pride, were challenged by a like pride and a like intellectual intolerance by the Jew. They could not break or bend the Jew. They could convert, or seemingly convert, every type of human from Japanese to profligate Parisian, but they could make no headway in leading Israel into the fold of Mother Church. They ceased to look upon the Jew as a lost sheep and identified him as with an incarnate devil, the sworn enemy of the Catholic. They hated the Jews because the Jews did not bow in homage before them. In substantiating these statements, I will confine myself to two recent writings of two prominent Jesuits, Father Francis Xavier Murphy and Father Lawrence K. Patterson. Both writings were censored and passed by Jesuit superiors, and, being such, bear the watermark of the authority of the order. What do these men say? Here then is the Jesuit teaching about the Jew. The words that I write between quotation marks are from Father Murphy's article. "The Jew is ubiquitous. Like Chaucer's friar, he entremets himself everywhere. He is a troublemaker. Where he is, there is trouble." Father Murphy's heart feels sometimes pity for the Jew, even when his intellect tells him that the Jew is getting what is coming to him. Quote, "My feeling is not always against the Jew. No man can read his past history without feeling deeply for him, even where his reason may tell him that the Jew is simply bearing the human or divine retribution of his acts," unquote. He goes on, "Father Murphy finds proof in the Bible that the Jews were fierce, truculent, coarse, sensual, crafty, cruel, and rises from the perusal of the sacred text with an unfavorable notion of the Jews," unquote. He adds, "What the Jew was in Holy Writ, we may justly expect to find him down the ages." quote unquote, namely, quote, fierce and sensual beyond the Aryan. So here are the Jesuits talking about Aryan supremacy before the rise of the Nazi Party. Boyd concludes, and I'll skip a few pages, when he says this. If we now turn to glance at authentic records of Jesuit history, we find that there is hardly an accusation that the Jesuits make against the Jews, but is strangely out of place in their mouths. The Jesuits accused the Jews of being meddlers and troublemakers. The Jesuits were suppressed by Pope Clement XIV because they had meddled in every conceivable business from trade to politics, and their suppression was necessary, quote, to restore tranquility to the church, unquote. Boyd Barrett concludes and says, it comes badly from the Jesuits to attempt to promulgate anti-Semitism on the basis of charges that have been not only officially made, but believed and acted upon by the supreme and infallible pontiff of the Roman Catholic Church when made against themselves. People in glass houses are foolish to throw stones. What the Jesuits accuse the Jews of being, that is what the Jesuits are. The Jesuits hate the Jews. They have always hated the Jews, and they will forever hate the Jews. And the Jesuits in this country control the NSA. Let's see what John Loftus has to say about the NSA in The Secret War Against the Jews, written by Loftus and Ahrens. On page 193, we read, shortly after the Clinton administration took office, the intelligence community withdrew its previous objections to publication. In fact, many of the pieces of the jigsaw already had passed into the public domain. In 1982, James Bamford published his seminal history of the NSA, The Puzzle Palace, which disclosed some of the main points of the NSA liaison, NSA GCHO liaison. The National Archives have been given dozens of declassified FBI documents citing British intelligence as the source of its information on Jews in the United States. And finally, in 1991, a pair of British authors confirmed a portion of the espionage on American Jews. Quote, we had them cold, calls one former intelligence official who was cleared to see the gold reports. We knew who was shipping the arms, who was paying for them, who was being paid in this country, every illegal thing that was going on in this country. Because of politics, very little was ever done with this intelligence. But so far as I know, the National Security Agency still has a group like that buried somewhere deep, unquote. It does indeed. Its nickname is the Jew Room. Its nickname is the Jew Room. Inside the National Security Agency is an intelligence center from which all American Jews are banned, regardless of their proven loyalty or devotion to country, just as the U.S. Navy banned Jews from electronic surveillance ships such as the USS Liberty. The Jew Room, unquote, is where the United States and Britain spy on Israel and on anyone who supports Israel. Its name is a misnomer, as the Intelligence Center has more than one room in more than one agency. As we shall see in the following chapters, it is and has been the heart of the secret war against the Jews. What Loftus knows, being the Jesuit temple coadjutor that he is, an Irish Roman Catholic, trained by Jesuits at Fordham University, I believe, and he was in the Justice Department for many years, Loftus rightly paints a picture of a world of intelligence against the Lord's beloved Hebrew Jewish Israelitish people. And one of the things he points out in his great epic work, The Secret War Against the Jews, How Western Espionage Betrayed the Jewish People, by John Loftus and Mark Ahrens, he points out this NSA room called the Jew Room. The Jew Room. Does not this have Jesuit pretensions? Does this not show a Jesuit hand ruling the NSA? Do not the Jesuits hate the Jews and have hated them throughout the duration of their order? Did not the Jesuits control not only Hitler, who killed many millions of Jews, but also Stalin, who aided Hitler in the murder? You see, Hitler and Stalin worked together. Both were tutored by Jesuits. Both were in office by the power of the Jesuit order, and both carried out the annihilation of the Pale of Settlement that had been begun by Tsar Nicholas I, who entered into a concordat with the Pope. This was all planned. Hitler and Stalin working together not only for the destruction of the racial Jews in the Pale of Settlement, but for the Gentile Protestant Prussians of Prussia and for the Orthodox peoples of Russia. Both these dictators working together for the annihilation of these heretics and liberals, according to the Council of Trent. And after the war, this entire fascist network was saved by the power of the Vatican rat lines, as Loftus writes in his book on the Unholy Trinity. And they are saved to continue this fascist plot of the Vatican with the billions in gold that they had stolen from the Far Eastern nations and from the European peoples, so that today we have an internationalist fascist intelligence community controlled at the top by the Jesuits through their Knights of Malta. And it is this intelligence community, which includes the NSA, high-level CIA officers, high-level FBI officers, that are all in secret war against the Jews of North America, all 6 million of them, the greatest haven in the world of the world's Jews, and therefore we know that they are targeted for extermination because it is the Jesuit order who rules the NSA, in which is the Jew room. Dear listener, do you see how as we travel through the stream of history that we can arrive at right conclusions in 2007? Do you see, if you know the past of the Jesuit order, its doctrine, its creation, its losses and its gains, its whole existence to counter the Reformation and to destroy the Reformed nations in which the Jews were always welcome and were given sanctuary? Can you see how the Jesuits are after the destruction of these nations so that they can revert the world back to the primacy of the Pope as it was in the Dark Ages? Are you beginning to see that the whole New World Order movement is nothing but a move by the Vatican to restore the old order? European feudalism, which is in fact today nothing more than corporate fascism, cartel corporate fascism, which financed both Hitlerism and Stalinism. Do you see how this New Age movement, led and fathered by the Jesuit Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, a French Jesuit, do you see how it is nothing more than an attempt to overthrow the Bible, which peoples read, and to get them on the shaky ground of subjective belief so that they can be easily moved into serving the papacy? That's the purpose for the New World Order and the purpose for the New Age movement. The Jesuits are master sorcerers at the top. None are their equal. They are masters in the art of war. They are, in fact, the one who mastered the tenets of Su Sing's The Art of War. The Jesuit order is most of all the enemy of God. God hates the Jesuit order. God hates its doctrines. God hates its deeds. The risen Son of God eagerly looks forward to breaking its power at its second coming. Because the Bible says that he shall laugh and have these nations in derision, because they've all consolidated themselves together. They've all organized themselves and conspired together against the Lord and against his Christ, saying, let us break his bands asunder. Let us cast their cords from us. We're not going to be limited by God's word or his commandments. We hate his word. We want the glory that the Son of God rightfully deserves and has earned and has been given by his Father. And the Pope of our making, he is the vicar of Christ. He is the one that the people shall worship, especially after his mortal wound and he's brought back to life. We, the Jesuits, will be his bodyguard. We are his obsidian order. We are his Praetorian Guard. We are the ones that will ensure his universal power. This is the mind of the Jesuit. And the Jesuit couldn't care less about you, children, helpless women, the sinking of the Titanic. When they pulled that off, they had to see. If you see the movie Titanic, you see this French woman saying to the captain, Monsieur, Monsieur, and she's holding a little baby. Do you think Captain Smith, that Jesuit, had any feeling for these poor women and their children about to drown in freezing water in the North Atlantic? This is the mind of the Jesuit. And we have to begin to think like a Jesuit if we are to resist him. We have to know his moves. We have to know what makes him go. We have to understand his abject and complete and total obedience to his superiors. We have to understand he's a part of a military order. He's under orders. He has no option but to obey or die. All for the greater glory of God. So this is the Jesuit order. This is the Reformation versus the Counter-reformation. This is the secret war against the Jews. This is the secret war against Bible-believing Protestants. This is the secret war against the Orthodox peoples of Russia. This is the secret war against the Muslims who would dare hold Jerusalem against the wishes of the Pope. This is the secret war against the Buddhists of the Far East who refused to bow to the Pope because, you see, their Dalai Lama was God to them, and therefore the Jesuits had to overthrow the Dalai Lama and make him subordinate to the Black Pope. All of this are what the Jesuits have done and what they will continue to do. This is why the Jesuits overthrow Hirohito. They had to overthrow the God of Japan. There can only be one God manifest in the flesh, and that is the Pope, whom the Jesuits bring to power, keep in power, and keep in line, lest they have to kill him like they killed Pope John Paul I. The Jesuits are the heartbeat of the papacy. Whatever the assistants and the general decides, that will be policy for Rome. Whatever the Jesuits decide economically, that will be the policy for the gold pool in London. Whatever the Jesuits in Rome decide, that will be the policy for the Archbishop of New York, controlling the Council on Foreign Relations. Whatever the Jesuits decide in Rome, that will be the policy for the Archbishop of Westminster, controlling London. And he is controlled by the Jesuit provincial at Stonyhurst. It's all the same, no matter what country you're in. It's the same Jesuit Roman provincial government overseeing the Roman hierarchy, the Vatican Empire, which in turn oversees the government of that particular country. That's how it works. And this is why the Jesuits are traitors. This is why they need to be punished for their high crimes of treason, of high treason, in their assassinations, in their overthrow of legitimately created nations like America, like Russia, like Britain, like Ethiopia, like Brazil, like South Africa, and like the North America that they are plotting right now to overthrow. So, dear student, I trust that this is a bit of a taste for you, that you will begin to see the power of the order, that you will begin to get a feel for what they do, how they move, so that you will be able to understand every facet that they control. From the black Muslims with Louis Farrakhan to the Ku Klux Klan, from the Mormon Church to the Jehovah's Witnesses, from the Southern Baptists to the Lutherans, the Jesuits control them all through high-level Freemasonry. As you see the Patriot movement, that is a tremendous web that is weaved by the Jesuits. Oh, what wondrous web we weave when we practice to deceive. But it is my prayer tonight, as you begin to get a feel for this, dear student, that your eyes will be open and you will see 1,000 things more than what I ever dreamed of, to continue to understand who rules and who will rule. The Lord Jesus Christ when he returns in power and glory. May the Lord bless you as you
Through the years of providing water filters to America, you've come to us and we've listened. You asked us to make the water level visible to eliminate the guesswork when refilling the water. We listened. You asked for an elevated base so the system could be used in places besides